It started on a Wednesday night. I was standing in my kitchen, the overhead light casting a warm glow on the countertop, where ripe plantains waited like silent witnesses. I slid a tray of thinly sliced fruit into a pan of hot oil, relishing the rhythmic hiss as each piece met the heat. The familiar aroma of caramelizing sweetness wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. For a moment, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to breathe. Evening routines had a way of smoothing out the rough edges of my day. That's when Celeste walked in. I heard her heels clicking on the tile before I saw her, the sound sharp and deliberate, slicing through the gentle symphony of sizzling oil. I turned, spatula in hand, and froze. She was wearing that expression, the one she reserved for moments she wanted to reframe as sober revelations, even when they felt like gut punches. Her brows were knitted together, lips pressed into a line that said clarity, but carried the weight of something much heavier. I held my breath. The heat from the pan rushed up my arm. I turned back to the stove and nudged a plantain slice with the spatula to keep the illusion of calm. "Honey, dinner's almost ready," I said, my voice steady even though my pulse kicked up a notch. I didn't ask what was wrong. Sometimes questions were too eager, too intrusive. She stepped forward, folding her arms over her chest. Her eyes didn't waver from mine. "Let's pretend we broke up for a week, just to see how we feel." The spatula clattered against the pan. A drop of oil leapt onto the counter, steaming where it hit. I swallowed. My mouth went dry, as though every familiar thing in the room was suddenly alien. Plantains, pan, the scent of home. It all belonged to a life I was suddenly watching from the outside. "You're serious?" I managed, measuring my words so they wouldn't betray the swirl of questions in my mind. She nodded once, deliberately. Just a reset. A little space. It worked for my friend Jolene and her husband. Jolene's name tasted like irony in my mouth. I remembered how that marriage splintered soon after her own reset, though Celeste never seemed to notice. I didn't argue. I took a slow breath, feeling the weight of it expand in my lungs before I let it go. "If that's what you want," I said. I thought of every promise we had made, each whispered vow and every late-night conversation stitched into us. I wondered if our foundation was built on sand. In that moment, I realized how worn I was, in body and spirit. We'd grown comfortable with friction, sparking arguments over dirty dishes or thermostat settings, when what we really needed was understanding. And yet, here she stood, treating our future like an experiment. She hesitated, as though expecting me to protest, to pull her back into the orbit we'd created together. When I didn't, her shoulders sagged imperceptibly. I flipped another plantain, crisping its edge to a perfect golden brown. Time slowed. I heard the faint tick of the wall clock, felt the porcelain of the kitchen counter cool beneath my fingertips. Everything in me wanted to shout, to cry out that love wasn't a science project, but the stillness between us was too loud. I kept my silence. 7 days, she said, voice low. She outlined the rules with the precision of a contract negotiator, mapping out boundaries I hadn't known we needed. But since we feared, I nodded. 7 days. The words were both endless and fleeting. I wondered how many mornings we would wake in the same house without speaking. How many nights I would stare at an empty pillow beside mine. She crossed her arms and studied the pan as if it held the answer to some complex equation. "I'll stay with Jolene," she said finally. "She's expecting me tonight." The words landed between us like a verdict. I set the spatula down and let the pan drain into the sink, grateful for the distraction of water filling with oil. When I turned back to her, she was watching me. Her face composed, but her eyes shadowed with something I couldn't name. I walked over and picked up a clean dish towel. My hands folded it in neat thirds. I placed it on the counter, each fold an attempt at ordinary order in the face of chaos. My heart pounded a quiet rhythm against my ribs, and I felt strangely hollow. Words hovered on my tongue that I couldn't catch. All I could do was look. at her and wait. She exhaled softly and reached for her bag by the door. The leather held the shape of her weak clothes, but I barely saw it. I was too focused on her expression, calm but fractured. I knew this was more than an experiment. It was a choice. And yet, I still longed to believe that she could be right somehow. She slung the bag over her shoulder, turned to face me, and for a heartbeat, her eyes softened. "This could help us," she whispered. "Just trust me." I met her gaze. Trust. The word felt brittle on my tongue, but I gathered the last bit of composure I could muster and answered, "Okay." She looked almost disappointed. Day 1. Peace arrived like an unexpected gift, wrapped in quiet and stillness. I woke up to empty sheets beside me, the pillow cool and untouched by body heat. My eyes opened to the soft glow of morning light filtering through the curtains. I lay there for a moment, letting the absence of her breathing settle around me. It was unsettling, like a concert hall after the final note has faded. Beautiful in its silence, but charged with an unfamiliar emptiness. Slipped out of bed slowly, careful not to disturb the air, and padded across the carpet toward the kitchen. The apartment felt larger than before, every corner suddenly conspicuous in its solitude. I flipped on the light and found the coffee maker waiting, its reservoir empty. Breathing in, I measured out grounds and water. The familiar sounds of brewing filled the space, as the rich aroma rose in curling tendrils. I realized I hadn't moved this freely through our home in years. When the coffee was ready, I poured a mug and carried it to the living room. I expected echoes of her presence, an abandoned book, a pair of slippers, but found only the faint imprint of morning shadows on the walls. I sank into the armchair by the window, cradling the mug in my hands, and exhaled slowly, tasting the bittersweet warmth. No passive-aggressive notes about dishes left in the sink. No sighs when I reclaimed a pillow she deemed hers alone. Just the simple, unadulterated peace of a house unshared. I took a sip of coffee and allowed myself to feel the novelty of it, the sensation of uninterrupted thought. For once, my mind didn't skip ahead to the next minor irritation or replay last night's tense exchange. Instead, I lingered in the present, watching swaying branches outside, listening to distant traffic hum, and marveling that something as small as quiet could feel revolutionary. Later, I wandered through our bedroom.